Workplace bullying and harassment investigations are among the most consequential responsibilities a manager or HR professional will ever face. Handled well, they protect people, restore safety, and maintain organizational trust. Handled poorly, they damage victims further, expose the organization to legal liability, and send an unmistakable message to every employee watching that the values posted on the wall are not the values practiced in the building. Most of the failures in workplace investigation practice are not caused by bad intent. They are caused by inadequate process, managers who improvise, HR professionals who are not trained in investigative method, and organizations that treat complaints as problems to be managed rather than facts to be established. This video is the process that prevents those failures. The first milestone is establishing investigative principles, the framework that governs every investigation regardless of the specific circumstances. 4 principles are non-negotiable. First, impartiality. The investigator must be perceived to be genuinely neutral. If the investigator has a prior relationship with either the complainant or the respondent that could reasonably bias their findings, a different investigator should conduct the investigation. Perception of bias, even without actual bias, undermines the credibility of any finding. Second, confidentiality. Information gathered during an investigation is shared only with those who need to know it to conduct or respond to the investigation. Breached confidentiality causes secondary harm to the complainant, poisons the investigative process, and creates legal exposure for the organization. Third, timeliness. Investigations that take months to complete cause ongoing harm to the complainant, who must continue in a hostile environment, and to the respondent, who must operate under unresolved allegations. A defined timeline, communicated at the outset, is an obligation. Fourth, procedural fairness. Both the complainant and the respondent are entitled to know the nature of the allegations, to be heard, and to have their account considered before any findings are reached. The second milestone is the investigation process itself, a structured sequence that protects both the integrity of the findings and the well-being of all parties. The sequence begins with an initial intake, a structured conversation with the complainant to understand the nature of the allegations, their timing, and the identity of any witnesses. The complainant should understand what the process will involve and what support is available to them. Next, the respondent is informed of the investigation and the general nature of the allegations, with enough specificity to respond meaningfully, but not so much detail that it creates an opportunity to coordinate with witnesses. Then, witness interviews are conducted in private with questions designed to gather factual information rather than elicit opinions. Interview notes are documented contemporaneously and accurately. Physical evidence, emails, messages, documents, records, is gathered and preserved. Then findings are drawn from the totality of the evidence, not from the relative credibility of the loudest voice. The third milestone is findings and outcome communication, how the investigation concludes and what happens next. Investigation findings fall into 3 categories: substantiated, where the evidence supports the allegation; unsubstantiated, where the evidence does not support it; and inconclusive, where the evidence is insufficient to determine what occurred. Each outcome requires a specific response. Substantiated findings require consequences proportionate to the behavior, communicated clearly and documented. Unsubstantiated findings require closure for both parties without creating a presumption of bad faith on the complainant's part. Inconclusive findings may require interim measures to protect the working environment while monitoring continues. In all cases, both parties should receive a summary outcome, not the full report, but a clear statement of the investigative finding and any actions being taken. Here is the trap. Organizations frequently treat workplace investigation as a damage control exercise rather than a truth-seeking exercise. The goal is not to protect the organization from legal liability. The goal is to establish what happened, address it appropriately, and prevent recurrence. When investigations are designed around organizational protection, they frequently fail all 3 of those goals, and the legal and reputational consequences of investigative failure are almost always worse than those of the original complaint. Your go-to. Review your organization's current complaint and investigation policy. Does it articulate all 4 investigative principles? Does it define a timeline? Does it specify the qualifications for an investigator? If the answer to any of those questions is no, those gaps are your highest priority HR policy improvements. Workplace investigation intersects with every component of employment law. The Employment Law Essentials video in this series provides the legal framework within which proper investigations must operate. That is an essential complement to this one. The trauma-informed approach to workplace investigation represents one of the most important advances in investigation best practice over the past decade. Research on trauma responses in the context of harassment and bullying complaints reveals patterns that investigators who lack this knowledge routinely misinterpret as unreliability or dishonesty. Non-linear recall, where victims remember incidents out of sequence. Delayed reporting, where victims do not immediately recognize behavior as harassment or feel safe to report it. Apparently inconsistent emotional responses, where a victim seems calm about serious allegations in some moments and distressed in minor details in others. These trauma responses are well documented by psychology and neuroscience researchers. Investigators who understand them do not dismiss nonlinear recall as evidence of fabrication. They understand it as a predictable feature of how memory works under traumatic stress. The investigator's interpersonal approach also has direct bearing on the quality of information gathered. Research on investigative interviewing, including the PEACE model developed by the UK College of Policing and widely adopted in formal investigation practice, demonstrates that non-confrontational, report-building interview techniques consistently generate more accurate and more complete information than the adversarial interrogation approach that some investigators default to when they have a prior belief about the likely outcome. This matters practically. The organization's ability to reach an accurate finding depends on the quality of the information gathered, and the quality of the information gathered depends substantially on the interviewer's approach. Documentation management during an investigation is another area where practice often falls short of standard. All evidence gathered, interview notes, documents, communications, witness statements should be maintained in a secure, organized, and confidentially stored investigation file. Investigators who rely on memory or informal notes create evidentiary gaps that can be exploited if the findings are later challenged. A disciplined documentation practice is not bureaucratic overhead. It is the foundation on which defensible findings are built. Thanks for watching. If you found this useful, hit like and subscribe to our channel for more practical insights. And if you're ready to go further, check out the next video on your screen.